Hey everyone, my name is Amber and this is the Smart Feasibility Calculator. It is part of the Lead Developer Suite and I'll just quickly run you through what it can and cannot do. So let's go ahead with this. So we've got, there are basically two sheets. So a setup and your calculation sheets. And what happens is when you start, if you're subscribed to the calculator or you signed up for a 14-day free trial, all you do is click on create sheets and you get two sheets. When you start, there are some important links. So you don't really have to select any of these or do anything up here. If you change the names over here, for example, you put in your address, let's say 123 Street, Victoria, whatever you put in, all those details get updated over there. So you can put your name over there. You can select your unit of measurement, for example, square meter, square feet, or if you just want to leave it as UOM. You can also select a currency symbol. So if you put a pound symbol there or a euro symbol there or any other currency symbol that is available for you to use, if you put that in there, you'll be able to change that everywhere else. So if you are from Australia, you select GST. If you're not, you basically select VAT, or you can select not applicable. So if it doesn't apply to you, you basically do nothing and you change the value to 0, and that will have any effect of GST or anything on the feasibility would be poof, evaporated. So all you have to do is select your tax rate. So in this scenario, for example, I'll select GST here for the time being, and I'll put in the tax rate at 10%. And margin scheme, again, it only is applicable if you're from Australia, and I'm not sure if it applies in New Zealand, or if it does apply, whether or not it's known by the same name or not. But it can be used. So you basically select yes or no for your margin scheme. So for example, in this scenario, I will select yes. In the margin scheme, you put in the value of the land, let's say 1.2, let's say 1.5, for example. And then you basically select the number of residential units you're going to develop, maybe 3, and you're going to have 2 commercials at the bottom. That's pretty much it. You select your sensitivity costs for costs. So say, for example, you want to see the costs escalate by 3% or costs going down by 3% in different scenarios that you can play around with. You've got sensitivity total, so you've got 3 and 5. So sensitivity total sales is 5%. So I want to see what is the impact of the sales if they fall down by 5%, or if they go up by 5%. And they just don't stop at 5%, they go by 5% and 10%, and we show you 2 different scenarios on that. We've got some certain assumptions that we made in the feasibility, and it is they're very generic, and I've tried to clarify certain abbreviations that we use, and they might be called something else. So a net leasable area is very straightforward. You might have some other word for it. Or for example, I know we call it LVR, which is loan to value ratio, but the same thing is known as LTV in US, which is loan to value ratio, and so on. So, and then we've got finance assumptions, and that's pretty much it. When you do all of these details, all your calculations take place here in the background, and then you can zoom in and select, okay, let's zoom in a little bit. So let's say we're looking at residential sales at the moment, and there are 2 different methods that you can use. You can use a ballpark figure. So if you've got a feasibility where you know that a 4-bedroom apartment sells for 600,000, and you can go with that. Or if you know the size of that apartment and you know the square meter or square feet rate, you can put in a value there and it will give you the price, what it should be selling for in that area. So, but you have to select either or. So whatever method you've got, you can, if you select this method, which is the net saleable area per unit, where you're giving a square meter rate or a square feet rate, you select yes. Otherwise, the other one would be the ballpark method. I personally prefer to stick with this one, where I know the average size of the units that I'm going to be developing, so that I have a square meter rate from the market that I can plug in and keep going. Same thing happens with commercial. You would need to know what your lettable area is. You put in the lettable area, you've got average rental rate per meter square. But what it does take into account is your capitalization rate and also your outgoings and so on. So you can put those in. When you got your land acquisition, this is a little bit more detailed than the 1 minute Feasibility, because what happens is that for smaller developments, let's say 2 units or 4 units and so on, the developments that start and finish within a 2-year period, you don't really need to get into internal rate of return and net present value and all those things, although you should, because a return is a return and a cash flow is a cash flow. But I have been doing developments which are small and are straightforward, and I know that the project won't last more than 12 to 14 months and so on. So in those scenarios, I usually have a very good idea of what I'm doing, and that's the reason I use this feasibility. But if you want to get into detail, the lead developer sheet in this page, and as you go down, you'll be able to see it, goes into all those details. For this is I use this a lot of times because I want to quickly understand what the numbers are if I start breaking them down a little bit more. So I look at these feasibilities where I can break it down, if there's a GST on the land, or if there's going to be stamp duty available, if there's going to be legals on acquisition. And there are always 2 methods for you to actually input anything. You can put a ballpark figure if you know that, or you can go by a percentage. So anywhere we've got a percentage, it'll tell you that it's taking the percentage off the construction cost, it's taking the percentage of the land, or percentage of the GRV, which is the gross realization value or total sales. Okay, so all of these very simple. All blue cells are your input cells, and all the percentage, all the black cells is where all the calculation is happening. You won't be able to see anything because all calculations are coded and they happen in the cloud. So that's how this add-on is created. So we've got land acquisitions here. So say, for example, I know that my stamp duty would cost me, or I went to the state revenue office and I was able to use their calculator, and I wanted to get everything right to the T, and that they told me my total stamp duty for something like this would be about, let's say, 78,000, for example. So if I put 78,000, it's going to tell me that, look, you can either put in a percentage. So it's going to give me an error, or it's going to highlight that line. It's going to tell me I can either put in a percentage or I can either put in a value. So I can't have both. So I'm going to change that to 0, and that error warning would disappear, and it would take that 78,000 over there. And the same applies to almost every input that we have. What is the best thing about this feasibility is that it is short enough that you can do this feasibility fairly quickly, but this is not a 1 minute feasible. It takes longer than that. It might take you half an hour, and if you're really pedantic about your numbers, you will spend another half an hour actually tweaking the numbers that you've got in there. So the reason I use this is because I've actually incorporated a lot of. It is detailed enough for me to be able to rely on this, especially for smaller projects. So if I've got, I can allow for other income, for example, which is not available in the 1 minute fee. So what that does is that I know that I'll be holding this project for another 10 months before I'm ready to start construction. So during the 10 months, I'll be renting the property out. So I can allow for those expenses. And if I also make any interest on some money that sits in the account and so on, I can allow for those things. So other income there's an option for you to add other income. Another thing different is that the finance costs are very detailed in this. So in the sense, although we don't get into the cash flow and the actual down to the T finance calculations, but they are pretty accurate in the sense that we've got interest allowed, we've got setup costs in them, and the best thing is that it has a funding table. Anytime you do a development, you will be asked to present a funding table, or your banker or your broker, whoever's involved or sorting out your loan for you, is going to ask you to get a funding table. What that they're going to give you a funding table, or they're going to just say, look, these are your total costs and we can only fund X amount of money. And you will have to list all your costs and provide to them so that they can see what you've already spent, what you haven't spent, and what are the soft costs that they will exclude from your total costs at the time of determining your finance, of the maximum debt that they can give you in terms of your development costs. So this allows you to have a funding table. You can say all the costs get listed. All the costs that you allow for here, they automatically get listed below, and all you have to do is say, look, let's look at one of these. So we've got a let's say we've got a construction contingency or statutory fees or agent's commission and so on. So whatever you've got, you can say what percentage of that cost would come out of your pocket. So, and you can do that individually. The reason is that there are certain costs, like for example, for the cost that you will incur when you go to an architect, you go to a town planner, get the site approved for development for let's say 10 townhouses or 50 townhouses or whatever you want to do, for example, or 5 townhouses. Those costs may not be included in your total development cost when your lender's looking at your finance, because those are considered soft costs. There's no hard costs. They haven't done anything, but hard costs are mostly related to construction and the money that you might have to spend to level the site, for example, or site cut and clean. That's the term we use here. So those hard costs, bank would always look at those hard costs and the value of the land, for example, to come up with the total development cost. And what this funding table does is it allows you to split those costs between developer's equity and the bank's TDC. This is what the bank will consider in the TDC, so that you can cherry pick and separate the soft costs that your bank may not look at. What this allows you to do is run a realistic scenario rather than just doing bank's going to lend me 70%, but when you realize that it is not really full 70%, because everything that you spend for the development, the bank didn't even consider that. So that's why I have a section called effective LVR, and there are 3 different options where one is via the funding table, where you select the percentage of those costs that will be borne by you as a developer and the ones that the bank will fund. So you can put in the percentage and say, look, like for example, construction and construction contingency, I put 0%. That means my share in here is going to be about 0%. So I know that this is going to be funded by the bank. So this will be regarded by the bank for the total development cost. And once I've got that total, there are 3 options. One is bank's GDC, one is the total project's GDC, and then we have a project GRV, which is the total amount of sales that you're going to do. And then the other option is the manual option, where you can manually put in a value here and set the LVR or LTV, for example, and then figure out the equity that you're going to need and the bank will give you. So it has all these things already built into this. So although this is a feasibility without the cash flow, but it is super duper detailed in terms of getting all these things in your feasibility, because if most of the people don't even know any of this, because when they do when people are trying to do their first development, they have no idea that this even happens. Because there is no formal training for it. There is nothing available here that tells you that's what they're going to do. But I mean, if you go into this and you get the in-depth training, in that I break down all these things in more detail. But to quickly give you an overview of what's included in this, you've got funding table, you've got funding options, and then for construction finance, what we do is there's a provision in the feasibility that it refinances your land automatically. So anytime you buy the land and you're holding it for 7-8 months, and then you start the construction 10 months down the track or 8 months down the track, whoever you have that loan with might not be the same lender who's going to fund your construction. And whoever is going to fund your construction would want to have the first mortgage on the land as well. So what this feasibility does is that it refinances the land automatically. You can select different interest rate for the land component and for the construction component, and calculate the interest in that respect. There is a drawdown rate, so at the rate at which you're gonna draw down your construction loan, and all you have to do is select bank's TDC or the project TDC, and all numbers will automatically get updated based on what you select. Now here's another thing that you will not see anywhere else. That is that these costs here, you see the finance costs during construction, these costs are coming from the construction finance. Now the bank will include that and deduct from the maximum amount that they have approved to lend you. So let's say your interest costs, banks calculated your interest costs are going to be about 100K for the year. It's a big project, and banks approved that their bank's going to give you $1 million. That's the maximum amount of money that they can borrow. But now this is something that you will never find anywhere, and that's why I'm telling you this, is that bank will only make $900,000 available for you to draw down, because bank's going to hold that interest with them and not release it to you out of the $1 million maximum amount that they've approved to you. And this feasibility takes that into account. It goes into a loop because that 100K is part of the total development cost. Total development costs are used to calculate the maximum amount of money that they can borrow for the project. So this goes into a infinite loop. So what we've done is we've put in a infinite loop in the background. So it's not infinite. We go over 50 times before we come up with the probable value, and we keep going in circles in a loop to be able to calculate this. So trust me when I say that there's some science going into behind this, and some serious codings going behind this in order to get this to you. So, and then you got tax liability. If you got GST, it will be GST. But if I went here and then I changed that to not applicable, for example, let's change that to 0. And when I come back here, all my GST stuff is going to get hidden automatically. You don't have to worry about it. All my tax stuff is going to disappear from the column, so that you can still use this feasibility even if there is no GST or there is no such tax applicable to you. So, but because there's you can manually override stuff, you can put in 15%. So if you are in New Zealand, I think it's about 14-15% GST over there. So if you put whatever value you put over there, and it will do the calculation for you from that point of view. So these are the liability. Now because I selected GST, now I can see GST. And then we get into a sub-project summary, and then we have the target development margin or risk margin. So you say, I'm doing this development, I want to make 20% development margin minimum, otherwise I don't want to do it. You put that number in there, and it'll tell you the maximum amount that you should be paying for the land based on its development potential. So, and then as we have for all my feasibilities, they come with a sensitivity analysis for development profit based on the sale price going up 5% and going down 5%, and the cost also going going up in increments of 3% and 6%, and we get all the details here. So that's the overview for this, and it is included in the Lead Developer Suite. You've got a 14-day trial. If you scroll down to the bottom of this page, you'll be able to find the links where you can sign up. Take care.